My mother, Isabel, rolled her eyes the second I walked into that Los Angeles courtroom. It wasn't a subtle movement. It was a full, theatrical, head-back eye roll, the kind that screams, "Here we go." It was a performance for her attorney, designed to communicate that I was, as always, an inconvenience in her perfectly rehearsed victim story. But then, Judge Marcus Cole froze, mid-shuffle through his papers. His eyes locked on my face, and I watched, with a cold, quiet satisfaction, as recognition hit him like a freight train. His jaw went slack. "Wait," he said slowly, setting down his pen and looking directly at me, the defendant. "These allegations. You're the defendant? You're Sienna Croft?" My parents, Isabel and Trevor Morrison, sat at the plaintiff's table, looking completely baffled. They turned to their lawyer, confused. They had no idea who I really was. And honestly, that ignorance, that complete and utter cluelessness, made what came next so much sweeter. Because I'm not just their abandoned daughter. I'm Senior Deputy District Attorney Sienna Croft, and I've spent the last decade putting manipulators exactly like them behind bars. Let me take you back 32 years. I was 3 months old when Isabel decided motherhood cramped her style. She was 18, fresh out of high school in affluent Pasadena. My father, Trevor, was a promising rookie for the LA Kings, living his dream under the bright lights of the Staples Center. A screaming, needy infant didn't fit their curated camera-ready life, so they did what selfish people do. They dropped me at my grandparents' house in Pacific Palisades one cold October morning and, for all intents and purposes, vanished. My earliest memory is standing on a wooden stool in Grandma Eleanor's kitchen. I was maybe 4, dumping an entire bag of chocolate chips into a bowl of cookie dough. She never stopped me, never got frustrated, just put her warm, flour-dusted hands over mine. She'd just laugh, a sound like wind chimes, and say, "The best cookies, my love, have extra love and extra chocolate." Grandpa Arthur, Justice Arthur Croft of the California Supreme Court, would walk through the door, still wearing his judicial robes, scoop me up with flour in my hair, and ask about my day like I was the most fascinating person alive. I'd tell him about the lizard I found in the backyard, and he'd listen with the same solemn intensity I'd later see him give to oral arguments before the highest court in the state. They never badmouthed my parents. Not once. When I asked why Mommy and Daddy didn't live with us, Grandma would smile sadly, her eyes full of a pain I wouldn't understand for years. "They are just very busy with important things, sweetheart." I believed that for years, because children believe the kind people who raise them. But I wasn't stupid. I noticed how other kids' parents showed up to soccer games at the Palisades field, while mine didn't. I saw how friends talked about chaotic Thanksgiving dinners with aunts and uncles and cousins, while my holidays were spent with 2 wonderful people who went to bed at 8 p.m. The visits from Isabel and Trevor were predictably rare. Christmas, maybe my birthday if the stars aligned. Isabel would arrive in a cloud of expensive perfume, wearing designer clothes from Rodeo Drive, kiss the air near my cheek, and spend the entire visit scrolling through her phone. Meanwhile, Trevor often stayed in his leased sports car, honking the horn until she came out. The few times Grandpa Arthur dragged him inside, you could cut the tension with a knife. You could feel the quiet disdain rolling off my grandfather. It was in the curt nod he gave Trevor, the way he'd immediately turn his body back to me, dismissing the man who was technically his son-in-law but clearly nothing more. Here's what nobody knew. What I didn't know until it mattered. Grandpa Arthur gave Isabel $3,000 every single month, starting when I was an infant, for over 20 years. That's more than $800,000. She took every penny and gave nothing in return. No visits, no calls, no presents, just a litany of excuses and increasingly desperate requests for more money when Trevor's inevitable business failures piled up. The sports bar in Santa Monica that lasted 11 months. The pro-athlete coaching company with 0 clients. The memorabilia shop in Silver Lake that filed for bankruptcy within 2 years. When Grandma Eleanor died suddenly from a stroke during Thanksgiving weekend of my freshman year at Stanford, my world shattered. She collapsed in her garden, planting tulip bulbs for the spring. I made the 6-hour drive home from Palo Alto in a blur of tears, arriving to find Grandpa sitting in the dark garden, his big strong hands cradling those small, unplanted bulbs. We just sat there together, in the cold, until the sunrise. Isabel and Trevor came to the funeral. They stayed for the service. They left before the reception. That's when I stopped making excuses for them. That's when I accepted the cold, hard truth. Some people are fundamentally selfish, and blood doesn't obligate you to anything. After Grandma died, something fundamental shifted between Grandpa and me. We weren't just grandfather and granddaughter. We became partners in survival. Those Sunday dinners became sacred. Sometimes he'd cook his famous pot roast. Sometimes I'd experiment with Grandma's handwritten recipes, her looping cursive on yellowed index cards. Sometimes we'd just order pizza and eat from the box, watching old black and white movies. But the real value wasn't the food, it was the mentorship. Grandpa taught me everything about the law, about justice, about the immense responsibility of using power. He taught me to see the patterns in human behavior, to respect the facts, and to be ruthless in the pursuit of truth. I graduated top of my class from Stanford Law. Grandpa sat in the front row, recording the whole thing on an ancient camcorder, beaming. My parents sent a card. 2 sentences. Good job. Proud of you. I stopped being surprised by their absence years earlier. Landing a coveted prosecutor position right out of law school in the LA County District Attorney's Office was partly Grandpa's doing. He made calls, vouched for me personally, and promised I wouldn't waste the opportunity. I didn't. I worked harder than anyone in that office. I stayed late, came in early, and took the cases other prosecutors avoided because they were too complex, too messy. Financial fraud, political corruption, white-collar crime that required weeks of meticulous document review in windowless rooms. By 30, I was handling high-profile cases that made headlines in the LA Times. My personal life was non-existent. 70-hour weeks were my normal. I lived on lukewarm coffee, takeout, and the profound grounding satisfaction of watching guilty people face consequences. No dating, no drinks with colleagues, no time for anything except work and Sunday dinners with Grandpa. Those dinners remained untouchable. No matter how exhausted I was, I showed up. He never missed one either, even as he entered his 80s and moved a little slower. Isabel called once during this period. I was 28. I hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. She wanted help with one of Trevor's legal problems, some business dispute in Long Beach. "I'm a criminal prosecutor, Isabel," I told her, my voice flat. "Not a civil attorney, and even if I were, I wouldn't help Trevor with anything." She called me ungrateful. I hung up. When Grandpa Arthur died at 87, peacefully in his sleep in that big Pacific Palisades house, I felt that familiar, hollowing emptiness return. But this time, I wasn't a lost 18-year-old. I was 32. And I had become exactly who he raised me to be. The will reading happened 1 week later at the attorney's office in Century City. I expected maybe some books, his watch, personal items. What I got was everything. The house, worth millions alone. The investment portfolio, the savings, the life insurance. Over $3 million total. Everything he had spent 40 years on the California Supreme Court building. He left it all to me, with one provision, contained in a sealed letter. "My dearest Sienna," it began. "You earned this. You earned this through the simple, profound act of showing up. Through loving me and your grandmother when others could not be bothered." I cried reading that letter. Not sad tears. Validation tears. The attorney, Maria Ortega, then handed me another envelope. It was documentation. Bank statements showing the $3,000 monthly payments to Isabel for over 20 years. More than $800,000 total. Emails from her asking for more. Texts promising to visit and then canceling. Scanned letters from Trevor, practically begging for money for his failed business ventures. "Your grandfather anticipated they might contest this," Maria said gently. "He wanted you armed with the truth." Exactly 30 days later, my attorney David called. "They did it," he said. Isabel and Trevor had filed a lawsuit. They claimed undue influence, that Grandpa was incompetent, that I had manipulated a grieving, senile old man for his money. I actually laughed. The irony was so painfully perfect. They assumed I was still that abandoned baby, easy to intimidate, easy to roll over. They had no idea I'd spent the last decade prosecuting entitled manipulators who thought they were above the law. Which brings us back to that courtroom. Judge Marcus Cole had been Grandpa's clerk 23 years ago, before becoming a judge himself. He knew exactly who my grandfather was, and he knew who I was. "Your Honor," I said, standing formally, "I must disclose that I had a long-standing personal and professional relationship with the late Justice Croft. Furthermore, I have appeared before you in a professional capacity as a prosecutor." Judge Cole nodded grimly. "The court is aware of DDA Croft's professional standing, and I was, indeed, Justice Croft's clerk." If either party objects to me hearing this case on the grounds of bias, speak now. My mother's attorney, a slick man named Richard Vance, whispered frantically with my parents. Isabel was probably telling him this was great, that the judge knew her father. Finally, Vance stood. No objection, Your Honor. We trust the court's impartiality. Big mistake. Vance's opening statement was a work of fiction disguised as sympathy. He painted Isabel as a devoted, loving daughter, cruelly separated from her father by manipulative grandparents who poisoned the relationship. Justice Croft was suffering from profound, debilitating grief after losing his wife of 60 years, Vance argued, his voice dripping with synthetic emotion. He was vulnerable, depressed, and the defendant, Ms. Croft, exploited that vulnerability. This will, Your Honor, does not reflect Justice Croft's true wishes. It reflects the wishes of a predator. David stood for our opening. He didn't need dramatics. Your Honor, this case is simple. Justice Arthur Croft was brilliant, careful, and intentional until the day he died. He left his estate to the one person who earned it through 32 years of consistent, unwavering love and presence. The evidence will show the plaintiffs received over $800,000 from Justice Croft while barely maintaining contact. This lawsuit is not about grief, it's about greed. Vance called Isabel first. She took the oath, dressed in conservative black, minimal makeup, playing the grieving daughter to the hilt. He was my everything, she said, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue she'd clearly brought for this performance. When he offered to watch Sienna while Trevor and I got established, I thought it was temporary. But they just kept her. They made me feel guilty every time I couldn't visit. They turned my own daughter against me. David stood for cross-examination. Professional, direct, deadly. Mrs. Morrison, you voluntarily left your 3-month-old daughter with your parents. Is that correct? Yes, but I was young. I was dealing with a lot. According to your father's personal calendar, you visited Sienna 4 times in her first year. Christmas, Easter, her birthday, and 1 Saturday in July. Is that accurate? Isabel's face flushed. I had expenses. I was supporting Trevor's new career. Expenses that were covered by the $3,000 monthly payment your father gave you for over 20 years, correct? That's over $800,000, Mrs. Morrison. Meanwhile, according to that same calendar, you saw your father 8 times in the last 10 years of his life. Less than once a year. Do you call that devoted behavior? Objection, Vance shouted. Harassing the witness. Overruled, Judge Cole said, his eyes fixed on Isabel. You may answer, Mrs. Morrison. I was busy. He knew I loved him. When, David continued, was the last time you saw your father before he died? A long, crushing silence. It was his 84th birthday. 3 years before his death. You came for 90 minutes. You left before the cake. You did not see him again until his funeral, correct? I think so. Yes. David let that sink in. One final question. Isn't it true you stopped coming around when he finally stopped giving you extra money beyond the monthly allowance? That when he retired and told you the monthly payments would continue, but the extra handouts for Mr. Morrison's failed businesses would stop, you visited exactly 0 times in the following 3 years? Trevor's testimony was even worse. He was all bluster, trying to play the big-shot athlete. He couldn't name a single school event he'd ever attended. David projected photographs onto the courtroom screen. Sienna's high school graduation. There's Justice Croft, front row. There's her grandmother. Where are you, Mr. Morrison? I might have had an away game. Sienna Stanford College graduation. Justice Croft, front row again. Where are you? I had business. You missed her law school graduation. You missed her swearing in. You missed every significant moment of her life. And now you want half the estate earned by the man who actually showed up? Vance tried the incompetence angle, calling a psychiatrist, a Dr. Alistair Finch, who had never met my grandfather. Dr. Finch diagnosed him with severe geriatric depression, based on absolutely nothing. David destroyed him on cross. So, doctor, you diagnosed a man you never met, with a condition not present in his official medical records, and you used that imaginary diagnosis to question the mental competency of a sitting California Supreme Court justice. Is that the sum of your testimony? Our witnesses were unshakable. Justice Andrew Liu, a colleague of Grandpa's, testified that Arthur was sharp as a tack until the very end. Maria Ortega, his estate attorney, confirmed he was methodical and intentional when he signed the will 2 years before his death, and that he explicitly anticipated this exact lawsuit. Then, I took the stand. David walked me through 32 years. Every missed event, every broken promise, every unanswered call. I kept my voice steady, factual, prosecutorial. Vance tried to rattle me on cross. Isn't it true you manipulated him? You saw a lonely old man and wormed your way in? I leaned forward into the microphone, my voice carrying across the silent courtroom. Mr. Vance, I spent 32 years loving my grandfather. If a multi-million-dollar inheritance was my motivation, I wasted an enormous amount of time. I could have been building my own wealth, working 90-hour weeks instead of having dinner with an old man every single Sunday. But I chose him. I chose him because he was worth more than any amount of money. And that is a concept your clients have never and will never understand. Judge Cole's ruling was swift and brutal. The court finds that the will of Justice Arthur Croft reflects his true and final intentions. There is zero evidence of undue influence. There is zero evidence of incompetence. The evidence does show a consistent, decades-long pattern of profound absence and financial exploitation by the plaintiffs, and a pattern of unwavering presence and love by the defendant. The will stands as written. He wasn't done. Furthermore, I am awarding full attorney's fees to the defendant. The plaintiffs brought this case without merit, and it borders on malicious prosecution. This court will not be used as a tool for a final act of greed. My ruling stands. The gavel came down with a sharp, definitive crack. As we left, Isabel rushed up to me, her face crumpled in real tears, finally. Sienna, please, can we just talk? I looked at her, at this woman who shared my DNA but nothing else. There's nothing to talk about, Isabel. I'm your mother, she cried. No, I said, my voice cold and clear. You are the woman who gave birth to me. My mother was Eleanor Croft. You had 32 years to show up. You chose not to. Do not contact me again. We're done. I walked out of that courtroom, past David, past the reporters, and into the California sunshine. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and totally free. Grandpa had given me one last gift, the ultimate public validation that I wasn't wrong, that love matters more than blood, that showing up matters more than showing off. 3 years later, I became a judge at 33, one of the youngest in California history. On my first day, I wore Grandpa's judicial robe. At 38, I was appointed to the California Supreme Court, taking his former seat. I wrote landmark opinions rewriting family law. Family is not a biological accident, I wrote. It is a daily choice. Actions matter, presence matters, consistency matters. Biology is a detail, not a designation. Isabel died 5 years after the trial. Heart problems. Trevor called, asking me to visit her in the hospital. I declined. She wasn't part of my life. Her death didn't change that. Trevor died 2 years later, broke and alone. I felt nothing. 20 years after Grandpa's death, they renamed the courthouse the Arthur L. Croft Justice Center. I stood at the dedication, looking at his portrait. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered. Everything you hoped for. At 60, after 30 years on the bench, I retired. My final visit was to their graves at the tiny cemetery overlooking the ocean. I planted more tulip bulbs around their headstones. Thank you for choosing me, I said, for loving me, for making me who I am. Because here's the truth. Family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who shows up, every single day for a lifetime. Blood may create a connection, but only action, only love, creates a family. That's not just my story. That's justice.